to us at the summit planning, we're considering this another keynote talk for us. We have invited speakers. We think this is really important. The steering committee, we would love to launch a statewide advocacy group. We want you all to be leaders, engaged. We're going to reach out to everybody who's here at the summit. We'd like to keep moving forward, as we keep saying over and over again. Wanda Bertram has been graciously organized this session for us. She's the director and host of Lexington Bike Talk Radio. I'll let her tell you a little bit about that. She's a really great, energizing leader for us in the States. We really appreciate you taking this lead. We've invited two state executive directors from their state advocacy group, Paul Winkeller from New York, and Amy Johnson Ely from South Carolina. So we have a nice mix. Both of these have been speakers have been recommended to me by a number of other statewide advocacy leaders. So thank you for being here. We're thrilled to have you all. And Amelia is going to join the panel too. So thanks so much.
Sure. And I'll just say a few words about what we're doing here. So I'm Wanda Bertram. I host a weekly show on Lexington Community Radio. It's kind of like a little NPR show. It's called Bike Talk. So in your program, I was given a promotion to executive director, and I'm just hoping that's a paid position. But I've gotten to know the community so well, and it's been a pure joy to do what I've been doing. I'm blessed to do that. One of the goals for the Bike Summit is to instigate the formation of a statewide advocacy organization. And we've been planting the seeds for one in Kentucky. And Dixie's going to talk about that a little bit more in her session this afternoon at 2:15 when she talks about the 3-foot passing law and how that happened. She's going to talk a little bit about what we've done and a little bit about how we might move forward and why that's important. And so I hope you can attend that. And so the goal for this session, though, is to look beyond Kentucky and what other states are doing so we can get some models and ideas for when we do move forward. So Amy and Paul are going to share based on their experiences in their states. And then you just heard Amelia speak. So she's worked with many state advocacy organizations. So she's going to talk about what other strategies and models might be out there beyond that. So each of them are going to take about 10 minutes, and then we'll have some remaining time so that you all can ask questions of them as well. So Paul, would you like to get started? Thank you.
Okay. I'm Paul Winkeller. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Bicycle Coalition. I spent a lot of time in the South after college, and I grew up in Boston. I can really turn on a Boston accent, but I gotta say, how y'all doing? I'm really delighted to be asked. I'm really flattered. I met Sharon, we had a long phone call, and I basically did a gigantic data dump from our drive, sent her so much I thought I would never hear from her again. And she turns around and invites me here. Actually, I'm going to make a few points. I'm going to try to keep it in 10 minutes. I've learned a couple things, actually. I've never been to Kentucky. It's clearly a happening state. This is a happening city. Your community bike shop blew me away last night, and the beer was pretty good. One of the things I've noticed just attending some of the sessions is that you're doing a really good job here developing data. I talk about this a lot in New York. We don't have a lot of data having to do with health, numbers of bicyclists, value of tourism, cost of injuries. It seems like there's an academic, maybe it's because I'm at Transylvania, it seems like there's an academic component that's going to provide a foundation for a strong statewide group. I usually operate, I usually like to, instead of telling people what I know, I like to ask them what they think. But I'm going to break that rule. I'm going to tell you a couple things I think if I were contemplating a new statewide organization, and then I'll be around and you can tell me what you think later. So we were established in 1990 when there were a lot of when the word coalition was kind of a cool word. And we were founded by basically frustrated, retired, high-level New York State bureaucrats who were frustrated that they couldn't do in their work what they wanted to do for the bike and walk movement at the time. So our approach in New York is rather pragmatic, pretty technical, somewhat technical, planning and engineering, problem solving. We are strong advocates when we have to be, when crazy things happen, like some legislators wants to mandate helmet usage or licensed bicycles. So we've been out there as advocates, but we tend to be rather pragmatic. And again, we represent the walk bike movement in the whole state. We've tended to more toward the bicycle side, depending upon the interests of our executive director. And one term you probably heard it. We used to be what's called a onesie. A onesie is a statewide group with just one staff. We now have about 5 FTEs because we've tripled our budget the last few years by both luck and hard work, and that is absolutely key to what you're facing here. And when you're a onesie in a huge state, and this is not as big a state, New York has a lot of big cities. It's a huge state. When you're a onesie, and you'll probably start as a onesie, it's really hard to do everything that's got to be done to manage an organization. And it's critical at the beginning that you've got a really engaged board, good network of volunteers, and a clear vision of what you want to be and what you want to accomplish. A couple of points I want to make is we're in the midst of our 3rd strategic plan, and I think a lot of you have probably been involved in strategic planning and SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You'll probably do that here as well. Strategic plans are really only useful related to how committed your board is to it. Because your staff, and you've got staff and a small staff, you're too busy scrambling around, sending emails and finding money. So the strategic plan is key, but you got to really keep it real when you do a strategic plan. And I've seen all kinds, and we tend towards the ones that are very action-oriented and rather short-term. I assume you're going to put together a board, and I could talk about the frustrations of boards. I was the board president. I was the first executive director of our coalition 18 years ago. Went away after a year because I thought we needed a professional transportation planner. Came back as board president out of retirement 5 years ago because I was frustrated that New York did not have a really good statewide organization. And one of the things I've learned about the board is I really would encourage you not to populate a board with just like people. You need like people. You need wired people. You do need everybody to be passionate about getting every person in the state on a bike or walking safely. But you have the opportunity in Kentucky because you knew to kind of learn from a lot of mistakes and a lot of frustrations. So you really can think about the composition of that board, diversity, both in terms of backgrounds, gender, race, age. You get young people on your board. Our board, I've seen too many boards of statewide groups that are old and Caucasian and wear spandex. It's not the future of bicycling. Actually, just describe myself. So I would also really encourage you, again, money is hard. In order to attract a high quality person that's going to stick with it and be your front person as you build your statewide organization, you really should come up with 2 years of funding, at least 2 years of funding, and maybe 3. It is absolutely the quality of the person in this onesie is going to be, he or she is going to be really working their butt off. And the more money you've got, the better person you're going to get. Underpinned by a strong board with a good strategic plan. The way that we grew our state, am I just got 4 minutes? Okay. The way we got really kind of lucky in New York with some key contacts at the highest levels of former commissioners who I mean, the story of how we tripled our budget, I haven't said this in public. I led a bike ride once from my local club in Albany. And I was biking next to this commissioner-looking guy, old white guy with white hair, really well-spoken, obviously knew public policy. And I was a ride leader, but we were talking bike policy. I sidled up to him and I said, Marty, you know, I'm an executive director, I'm constantly marketing and selling. He said, oh, I'm Joe Martens, I'm Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, friend of the governor. Incredible DEC commissioner. He hung on working for Andrew Cuomo. It was really tough. 5 years. He left after he had made sure that there would be no fracking in New York State. Talk about fracking. But he asked me what my vision was for our organization because he knew about us. And I said, we need to have 6 FTEs. We need to have $500,000 budget. We need to get serious. And after he resigned and is now working on renewable energy, he called me up for coffee and said, I'm going to get you there. And we're there. And we're there because of the champion, because of a lot of factors, but there's a lot of luck in this stuff. There's a lot of luck. And the way that and you know, it's not like this guy gave us $500,000, but what we did, we identified, and we can do this in Kentucky, what are the things a statewide organization can do here that's unique, that no one else will do? Well, if you don't do it, no one else will do it. In New York, we decided that we wanted to train, we offered a grant to train local public officials around the state who are required to get continuing it every year to maintain their status, planning and zoning boards, to get complete streets training. So we are writing our own version of complete streets training. That is something that's going to drive public policy from the grassroots. No one could have done it. The state government was eager to give us money to do it because there's a clamor in New York for more biking and more walking. New York, by the way, by some measures, is the worst state of the country for bike crashes. And there's special pots of money. I don't know where Kentucky is, but there are special pots of federal funding for those lowest 15, and half our budget is federal safety and education money, including working with law enforcement. And a lot of our deliverables now are geared toward law enforcement. That money's not going away. Cop money's not going away. We market these unique things we provide on our new website. We're going to call it Expert Assistance. They're not consulting because we don't want to compete with consulting firms. We've generated over $100,000 of projects around the state that draw on our unique 30 years of working with stakeholders around the state, public and private. We are perceived to be an organization that knows where the bodies are and knows how to fashion pragmatic solutions around complete streets, tourism, education. People are asking us, after we had our first bike summit last year, we started getting asked to do stuff and to be paid for stuff. So that's helped diversify our funding from total reliance on one source of federal money. Lastly, real quick, you're probably going to think about membership. Membership in statewide organizations is really hard because it's kind of esoteric. It's not like a local bike organization. Bike shops have no money. Which I mean, you want to be friends with them and put your literature. Clubs are good, obviously, you're connected to clubs. Lastly, always remember that we've got the magic. The magic is biking. Everybody biking safely. And remember, when you're working your butt off, remember to ride your bike every day, because I sometimes forget.
All right, I think next Amy is gonna share her thoughts.
All right, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. The invite, so I'm from South, well, not from, I'll tell you that in just a second, but I work in South Carolina, the state capital in Columbia, right in the middle. And, but I moved there from Georgia. So I originally, I went to grad school for geography of all things, but oddly enough, I was actually informed a lot of kind of how I look at things from a state perspective. My desk is just covered in maps. But so I originally went to grad school and just was biking all the time. This was in Athens, Georgia. And there was a little organization there, a tiny one, used to be full of spandex, Athens Clark State Cycling, and then a guy getting his degree in transportation geography took it over, just renamed it biking, and did tour de sprawls. So I was a volunteer for a really, really long time, since like, I guess it was 2003 or so. And so, so I really, really got into this as a volunteer, and I just want to stress like that's what it's all about. It's about the volunteers. It's about the base. You know, ultimately you want to get organized, and you want to you want to hire somebody to do the work that takes time and people that can really drill into things and develop an expertise, and that's when you're really organized and you can hire people. But you can't just get there quickly without that base. In fact, so anyway, just long story short, then 2000, gosh, I feel really old right now, but that was maybe 2010 or so is when I got a job part-time working for Bike Athens, that same local advocacy organization. And then 2012 or 11 or so is when I applied to the state position in South Carolina. And so moved 3 hours away. I still miss my town, Athens, Georgia, where I lived for 11 years. But going from that local to that state perspective, for me was really a little bit shocking. It was difficult. But I have a quick question for Kentucky. How many of your roads are state-owned? You can kind of have that as a perspective. Sorry?
I know the answer.
You do?
Yes, yeah. 85%.
85%. Okay, that's huge. So good. This is very helpful because South Carolina is the same thing, but Georgia was not anything like that. That's a really big deal. That is one of the biggest reasons. So that's good because now I can relate a little bit. So it was a shocker going from Georgia, where only 15% of the roads are state-owned, where local advocacy was hugely relevant. In fact, that's kind of where I think the rubber meets the road anyway. Biking and walking is inherently local. Very much so. It's about proximity. It's about a lot of things that are very inherently local. Breweries, all that thing, whatever. You guys know what I'm talking about. But so the South Carolina State Organization got started in 1995, mostly because there was so much frustration because 70% of our roads are state-owned, which is not the norm. I think the norm is like 50% maybe across the country. So 70% of our roads are state-owned, and so people had to form a statewide coalition because if they wanted to get anything done locally, they had to deal with the TOT. So that's not the norm, and it's also something that has to be dealt with because state DOTs are not inherently trained through AASHTO and all these things, not yet, it's going to change soon, to deal with those biking and walking concerns. If they want to do it, they have to either already ride a bike, they have to have personal experience, they have to have personal values, but there's not a lot of professional motivation for them to really do biking and walking stuff right now. So it is absolutely something that has to occur by advocates pushing out at the state level. So I should probably answer some of these other questions. But right. What?
You're fine.
Okay.
You don't have to.
So that's how we started. So 1995, advocates from across the state. Charleston has a huge bike walk mode share. Who knows why? Universities, it's flat. There's just a lot of it happening. It's hot, but people still do it. It's the peninsula of Charleston has almost like a uniform, just like, really nicely dressed, but then there's shorts and things. It's just how to do things. There's an active living culture there too. So Charleston really heavily populated the Statewide Bike Walk Advocacy Organization at the time. And they were all volunteer run for like, I think about 10 years. And they didn't even get a 501c3 until 7 or 8 years later, about 2003. But they still, it took a long time to generate like, what do we want to do? How do we want to turn our frustrations into some strategies to make some changes, to make some improvements? And it took folks a long time at the state level to get together to really get to know each other. Relationships are a lot of that. You know, you have to have somebody on your board who's very, very tech savvy. And I think I've talked to Sharon about this, maybe probably talked to her off about this point, but if you're a state organization, you've got to have somebody who can create a way for people to send money to you online. You've got to find somebody who can really understand how to use Google Groups or something, or doodle polls, just something to really automate your ability to connect.
Hire 3 12-year-olds.
12, yeah, that's a great part. I just hired a 23-year-old, so I'm not on onesie anymore, thank God. About 5 months ago, and so I lost like my GPS navigation on my phone, and I just was like, please help me back on my phone. You know, I mean, I'm over 40 years old, so I know that kind of thing right now. But anyway, so but here's the other thing is that I learned a lot through the years of working as a volunteer. And things that, all that knowledge that I gained through all those years of working as a volunteer really enabled me to apply to work as a bike advocate as a paid position. So there's just a huge amount of knowledge. I don't understand why transportation policy is so opaque, but it is. And it's just something that bringing together collective knowledge from people and going regularly to trainings. Nobody really goes to school for this stuff, not unless you're not even local and state planners and engineers. It takes them years to kind of.
That's changed. Well, at least
It
up
has.
in Northeast, that's really changed.
Right, which is good. So, but anyway, it's not rocket science, but if you have a day job, it can take a long time. I mean, it just depends on bringing that collective knowledge together can speed up that process pretty quickly. So, what else? All right, so we got started, and we one of the best things that they did actually initially is to host safety classes around the state to really bring something of value to the state and to get the name out there and to get that name recognition. We have a lot of name recognition. The strangest thing I think that is an example of that is the deputy director for planning at DOT has a tattoo of our logo. I don't know how that happened, but it just did. So anyway, you know, there is our logo for some reason, because after being around for 20 years, it's important to really kind of get a logo and to get a strategic plan. I won't go into detail that, but I'm going to just mention that really elevate what Paul said is to have that direction and to decide that you're going to invest and focus your very valuable volunteer time into specific things, because you don't want to get too fragmented, because you want to say, we're going to do this, and then you want to actually do it. You got to figure out how much time it's going to take to do it, so that you can really put your successes next to your logo as a history on whatever website you create for yourself, so that you really start to kind of build that momentum and that recognition. Because as a state level organization, it can be difficult sometimes when you can't host events. You can't host in-person meetings and say, oh, there's a brewery that group always goes there. You have to have your recognition and your effective, your name is a big thing, I think, as a state organization. You gotta keep that in people's memories. So let's see what else. I'm kind of jumping around. So the way that our organization, once they got established in a board and really kind of gelled and got organized in 1995, they hired their executive director. I'm sorry, 2005 is when they first did it, but they did it because they got money from a specialty license plate fund. So that brings in about $25,000 a year. There's no overhead on that. We don't even have to manage that. So it's a check that just comes to us, but it was all, and that covers our base costs. And the other thing is that now all of a sudden you're marketing license plates. You're marketing bicycling through people just buying license plates. So it's free marketing for bicycling itself. So that was a big deal. I remember talking to Robin Stallings with Bicyclists, and they have 5 specialty license plates. They also have a staff of 10 right now. So in some states, South Carolina included, I don't think there's, and Texas, I don't even think there's a limit to that. They had talked at one point in South Carolina about limiting the number of specialty license plates out there because police officers were having a hard time kind of recording people's tag numbers and everything and the specialty affiliation. But I would really look into that. It takes a lot of work. It's a legislative thing. You have to get like maybe 400 people to commit to buying it. Or
We have.
I can't remember. You do. Okay, you do. Good. Look into getting another one. We only have one, but the way state of Georgia, they have a specialty plate, and that money goes directly into the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, also in our state called the Department of Public Safety, and then they manage it, and then they package it with other safety money like 402 money, and then they will give it out as grants. Well, in Georgia Bikes kind of, it's understood that as long as they don't, well, it's understood that there's going to be a one-person thing. Go ahead and keep speed on the order.
Yeah, where it's your.
Okay. So South Carolina, we made it so the law was written so that the money could just go straight to us. Georgia's had a interesting director of their highway safety office, and a few years ago that money was threatened because they viewed them as being too much of advocates. And so, but I don't, that's just background on our experiences. But it's also really important to partner really well with your agencies. So, all right, let's see. Always keep your board fresh. Always find, I think there's 3 roles on our board that I think are really critical. A president who's a good leader, who's diplomatic, and a good listener, and also a good facilitator. A governance committee chair, who, if you need to redo any kind of policy or bylaw, the executive director doesn't have to do it. You can work with that person to do it. A fundraiser is huge. And your diversity of your board is a big deal. If you end up with what Paul mentioned, which is exactly the struggle that we have on our board, you're going to stagnate. The energy level is just going to just slow down pretty quickly. All right, so quick thing, successes, failures, and a surprise with our programming. So we've had a combination of education. We had Safe Streets, Save Lives, which is a big education campaign, Department of Public Safety. That was big. That's continuing. We developed digital resources. We don't have a lot of time to invest in it right now, but we continue to kind of keep that going out there. We always get requests for stuff like that. Anyway, I would love to find some more time and resources to kind of focus on that, but that's in the future. That was a big success. One of the most recent successes that we've had is that while we have a terrible bike and pedestrian safety rate or fatality and serious injury rate, we just partnered. I've worked on a ridiculously huge application for grant funding through Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we were lucky enough to get the combination because they also want to invest in the South. That is for a state complete streets policy, and we're pushing that. We've been doing that. We've had that grant for a little less than a year, but we've been working on that for 2 years, using in part mostly membership money, some of that sugar plate money. And one of the best things that we did, which is what they require, is to partner. Every state has a different experience, but for us, every time I walked up to the DOT and met with a top high-level official, you know, different people have different personalities, and there's always, every 2 or 3 years, there's a different person in that role, a different series of folks in those different roles, and they always in the back of their mind are just like, all right, so go have fun biking. And so we partnered, and I got this from California Bike Coalition. We tried to flank ourselves with people representing other reasons for why they wanted biking and walking in their communities. Not just, we were sort of the experts because we have been doing it for a really long time, but it was absolutely critical to the weight of our thing. We had ARP, and we had Coastal Conservation League, which they're just heavy hitters incidentally in the environmental, but the blind skids was the other thing. So young and old, they were pointing us. And that was absolutely critical partnerships. So the big, okay, so just real quick, the failure was, I will just skip that. You guys can talk to me about it afterwards. But the surprise was in Athens. I had no idea how valuable the bike-friendly community application would be. We didn't have a very good relationship with our city government at the time, and I was like, why do we want to give them an award and we have to do all the volunteer work to do all the data to fill this out for them? But the result of that application was huge because I had no idea there really was even such a thing as a ticket diversion program. And I had been getting training on funding, and I knew how to get that funded, but I didn't have a project. So I was filling out an application, and I was like, oh, look at that. Stick that in there, and now there's a ticket diversion program in Athens, Georgia. So it is a huge basket of ideas of things to do in the future, and they're tested and true. So anyway, that's all.
What's a ticket diversion program?
So what that does is that somebody gets a ticket, instead of paying the fine, which can often be $250 or $400 possibly, they take a class. And so what they did is we went to the judge, who I was also surprised that the judge was willing to set up that program. And they had us teach not only to people who were getting tickets for bicycling the wrong way, they had us bring those people into the same classroom as folks that had a DUI, had lost their license, and needed an alternative. They had the Athens Transit come in and teach folks how to use the bus, and then right after that teacher taught about how to use the bus, we were out there teaching about how to bike safely. So it's a way to, you institutionalize and take your special interests out of the special interests, and you just inject it into the norm. So that was complete.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Jump in.
Hi everybody, you know who I am. So these two experts live and breathe this, and I had to ask some of my colleagues for help, so I have a bunch of notes with me because there's some really interesting stuff going on around the country at statewide level. And one thing that really surprised me in looking into this is how many different models there are. On one end of the spectrum, you have groups like in California, which is really a coalition is in their name, of all the citywide groups. That model probably doesn't make sense for Kentucky because there aren't a lot of city and town level local groups. But it's going to be important. I think Georgia is a good example of, as those groups, I know there's interest in the room in developing those local groups, it's going to be really important to figure out partnerships with those groups. Another example I'll give is sort of a cautionary tale as you think about developing local groups in addition to statewide groups. Is in Pennsylvania, they've had a really hard time developing a statewide group. They've got two really strong city groups in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and they've tried a couple times to sort of partner together, and they do partner together on a lot of statewide work, but they haven't been able to form an official statewide group. Maybe it's not necessary because most of the state is in those two cities. But
tell about Vermont.
Yeah, so Vermont. Vermont's a really cool case. Local Motion is the name of this organization, and I'm glad you reminded me to mention them because a big part of they're based in Burlington. There are several groups that maybe started out as the local group, turned into a statewide group, or sort of merged, like Washington State merged with Cascade Cycling Club, and now it's one large group. But in Vermont, an interesting revenue source to think about is they manage a ferry for bikes who are trying to get across a body of water, and they recognize this need. They thought, should we build a bridge? Should we run a ferry? They decided to do the ferry, and that's actually a huge revenue source for them.
Yeah, but they ate the state group.
Local
motion took over the state.
Yeah, so
the
they-
state group
yeah.
folded.
Yeah, so they.
And that was nasty.
Yeah, and I was not around for that, so maybe you can share more on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that kind of thing happens. So there are basically 50 different models, and I think that makes a lot of sense because every state, the way policy happens, the way states are controlled. I'm really glad Amy brought that up because Kentucky is really unique. Like I said, 85% of the state of the roads in the state are controlled by either state or county. Within cities, it's still really high. So you have a few metropolitan areas, and even within those metropolitan areas, it's about 2/3 of the roads are controlled by the state. So a statewide group is going to be really important if you want to make change on those roads. I don't know the exact ranking of how rare that is, but I know it's in the top 10 of states with the most percentage of state-owned roads. Another thing that makes Kentucky really unique is you actually have a really high percentage of transportation funds at the state level going towards bike ped. You're actually 6th in the nation for spending on bike ped, which is huge. So we're excited to sort of see what else you can do with having that much funding. There's clearly a ton of support, and as you heard from the secretary this morning, yeah.
That surprises me. Is that through the TAP program or?
So I don't know, Bill. Maybe you can.
No, well, I'll tell you what.
Answer.
Let me just say, we've got to be very careful and circumspect in regards. There was a very deliberate reason to invite the secretary this morning, so he could say in front of all of you,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Now we all get it, that he gets it.
And
The next time we talk to him, we remind him
Get the money.
that he gets
said
it.
that.
Yeah, so that was, and there is that lobbying going on.
Yeah.
But here's the deal here.
Yeah.
Amelia, we don't get any money. The Bike Commission is all volunteers. We're the official thing created by legislature. But as you heard me say yesterday, the concept of pushing on a road, we have historically, and you can even say that I said this, but be careful about it. We have had to fight the Transportation Cabinet more often than not to get the respect and the attention that we need. It took us 6 years to get a real cyclist as a bike ped coordinator. It used to be an office where they put somebody in a windowless room in a basement in the Capitol as an entry-level engineer, most of whom did not ride bikes.
In New York State, they put the bike ped coordinator in the basement in the Division of Aviation. And this was 5 years ago.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, just to summarize, yeah, we are doing stuff. We've come a long way, and that's one of the reasons we decided. We've come a long way in 10 years. We have a long way to go,
Yeah.
and particularly funding a, quote, coalition.
Yeah.
Everybody here, we're all volunteers that are doing advocacy.
Yeah, and so on your state report card, which I have a printed copy of here, we talk about how strange it is for the 43rd state to have the 6th highest level of funding, and where is that going? And why isn't it being reflected in your safety numbers and your ridership numbers? So that is a real question we had, and I was sort of sent here with the homework of figure out what's going on there. What's happening?
Well, those are very important data.
So, yeah, they really are. And so that bicycle friendly state survey that Troy helps give us information for every year, that's something we can look back and see these numbers changing over time. And so it's a really interesting aspect of that program, and I hope it will be a useful tool for the future statewide group here. One other thing I wanted to share, so we, as part of that benchmarking report that I talked about this morning, we do have a component talking about advocacy groups, and so we did this survey earlier this year of advocacy groups, including state and local, and we got responses from 20 statewide groups, so obviously not all of them, but not every state has one, so we were pleased with that number. But we asked questions like how many staff you have, what's your budget, who are your top partners, and a couple things I wanted to share. The staff ranged from 0, meaning all volunteer, to 25. And I don't know who that is, but I'm guessing Cascade in Washington. They're huge and really well run. And
Could be TA.
yeah, and I think a model to think about both Cascade Cycling Club, which is sort of Seattle and it's become all of Washington, and League of Michigan Bicyclists, is they do a lot of rides and events. And my colleague Ken McLeod, who's our policy director, put it in a really great way. He said, you know, for League of Michigan Bicyclists, advocacy is what they do, but it's not how they're funded. They're funded through these rides, you know, things that your club is already doing is a great opportunity to raise money for advocacy. Other groups go after, you know, advocacy-related money through highway safety funding or health funding, and so there are a lot of different models to think about when you're thinking about, you know, that generating income. As far as top issues that survey identified, 80% of those respondents said complete streets was one of the #1 issues that they were working on for their state. Traffic safety was next at 70%, and education was at 60%. So those are sort of some of the most common things that we've seen. Top partners was another question we asked. 95% said the State Department of Transportation, which is no surprise. Other biking and walking organizations, I think both locally, nationally, cross state, you know, those partners are essential. And then law enforcement was another really high one. 90% said that law enforcement was one of their top partners who they've worked with within the last year. Yeah.
And this is just a general comment, you're talking about partnerships. I think one really lost opportunity, and maybe some of you guys are from local health departments, but I think the health departments and the health community in general are being left out, I mean, for the most part of this conversation. And I'm not sure what the status is of forming a Kentucky coalition, but I think there's already some good partnerships kind of in place that you could draw on to make a Kentucky, you know, organization. But
Yeah.
Health departments are a huge resource because of, I mean, they're all about improving health outcomes, and that's what walking and bicycling is a big part of it.
Yeah, huge resource and huge funding potential. Not necessarily, I won't make promises on their behalf, but there is a lot of funding coming from health, both privately through, you know, health foundations, but also public health money. There's a lot of potential there to fund advocacy and infrastructure and those you know, those types of events, education. We asked about top challenges. Lack of funding and staff capacity, no surprise, were the biggest ones, and political leadership was the 3rd highest one. So things to be prepared for. And then sources of funding. Grants, event fees, and government contracts were the top 3. So I think that really, you know, reiterates some of the things you've heard from the existing statewide groups here. So I think I'll end it there. We're right at the 11 o'clock hour, and just open it up to questions and conversations, because I think Paul and Amy have so much expertise.
And Sharon has advised me to run over a little bit, so if you do need to go, you're welcome to, but we're going to keep going. So, questions?
I'd like to make a general comment, if I might. It seems, you know, one of the things I try to do, and people around me try to do, is organize things first. And you've heard today and yesterday, there's so many lenses to look through in the cycling advocacy world. Everything from, as I said this morning, girls doing mountain biking to electric bikes and all this. But one of the things that the cycling community has come together a couple of times to form advocacy groups, only to have everybody all in, everybody in this room is all in. By the end of next week, well, half of you will be all in. And by you know, 2 months from now, 3 of you will be around. And after that, 1 person's carrying the whole load. You need a professional person, you need funding for it. So the threshold issue is finding funding to pay somebody to own it, along with volunteers. That would be the first thing we're thinking about. And grants, getting it from the government. This is still a pretty political year, as you'll hear later on today. It took us 7 years to get regs and 3 years for a 3 passing rule, fighting with other constituencies, if you will. But the funding is the first thing to get somebody really on board.
Bill, where does the money from the specialty plates go?
Well, okay, let me hit that and then I'll hit some other ideas. The Paula and I license plate, as I said the other day, we get $10 per plate. It generates about $70,000 a year, sometimes up to 80. So I want you all to buy one this year, maybe we'll get up to 90. But then the commission by statute has to use it for education. And the program that has been developed, and you know, as lawyers, maybe you can move things around in the program, is we accept grants from nonprofits in education, teachers, schools, hospitals, health departments, for projects to support health and safety and education in cycling. And actually, it's what funded this summit, too, with one grant. And that was a big chunk of the money. Now we're getting applications that far exceed the income we're getting. And it was interesting to hear, well, maybe could we use it? I'm thinking, could we use it to fund an advocate, professional coalition? But then that's a lobbyist. You've got to be careful. There's a lot of other elements into that. I'm not so sure we could use money allocated by the legislature for this purpose. So it's going to have to come from somewhere.
I wanted to make a comment about language. That's the one thing that I didn't say. I'm going to say it very quickly.
So we're having our own summit in a month, and our second summit. And we framed this summit around the word education, because the word advocacy scares people. So we're talking now to the New York Bicycling Coalition that everything is education. And you know, again, language is, you know, you can use language to your purposes, but we believe that when we talk about infrastructure in Quickly streets, that's education. When we talk about 3-foot safe passing, which by the way, we can't pass in New York, again, that's an education, it's not an advocacy campaign. When we talk about tourism, and we're getting a lot of money to drive tourism to upstate New York and things like Tourism Magic, that's education. So everything we're doing, because half of our funding is state, our major funder, $230,000 for the last 17, well, it's gone from 75 to 230. They won't even put their logo on our designated fund. The Governor's Traffic Safety Commission will not put their logo on our bike summit because they perceive us as advocates. And we printed our brochure, our program last year, and we had to throw it out because they saw that there were panels about 3-foot safe passing and legalizing electric bikes, and their government money couldn't be used. So language, I would start out, I would ramp down the word advocacy. The other thing is when you get a staff person and you get some government funding, make sure their timesheets silo off that time when they're
Yeah. Another thing, yeah, definitely, if you're accounting for your time, then you can show, like, if your GOHS, like, questions that you just show your time sheets. But the other thing is that membership money can pay for a lobbyist,
Right.
like no other money can. So if you're a state organization, we have a lobbyist that helps us with trying to get a law passed. Unfortunately, we did a 4-year effort and it didn't work. He worked on that for a long time, and now he's helping with the DOT campaign. But he's still a lobbyist. But he actually, when he sends us an invoice, he actually breaks it down that half of it's lobbying and half of it is consultation, which he's doing.
Yeah,
He's teaching us about things, and then we do the advocating. But then you have to really strictly look at the definition of lobbying.
we always say that it's our board that are the advocates,
Yeah.
which is the educators.
Yeah.
We have some questions.
Just one quick comment, which kind of reinforces what's been said. I think you're a whole lot better off using non-governmental funding if you can get there, because you don't have to worry about all these verbal dances if you're using non-governmental money. If you're gonna be lobbying, best find another source, and then use governmental money for real education.
The California Bike Coalition, which really has taught all of us a lot, I don't even know if they get any government money at all.
Yeah,
Very
we
little.
have about 2 more minutes. Can we get some more questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, Paul, I had a question for you. You talked about sustainable funding and how much money really you would need, but to look at 2 years of funding to really sustain, how
Well,
much?
I've noticed the cost of a macchiato at the espresso, it seems like the cost of living out here is It's $250 from
it's
Mount
cheaper,
Iona and
yeah.
$350 in New York. So I always say in New York that you need, working with a group in Rochester that wants to get a staffer. I said you need $180,000 for 3 years, $60,000 a year for maybe a $40,000 salary and then fringe and office. But could be you might need $120,000 in 3 years. I mean, again.
And that
You
money.
might also get space donated from a public entity.
Yeah, we work in CoLab, a shared workspace. We don't even have an office.
I'm gonna go to
I
Bo.
just wanted to add one thing about funding, and it's probably like a long-term option. One, public health has a lot of funding, but it's government. But I was on the board of the Cascade Bicycle Club, so I know their financials, and they have a huge, I think they have a $7 million budget. But the majority of that actually comes from their rides.
Yeah.
And so if you're thinking about like revenue, and they're a ton of work. Like with that said, like
That's key
they're-
about the rides.
they're
We
a
have
ton of work, but
we
they
have-
build such a program that it's their main, they have more money to just do whatever they want with, and I think that's a lot of, and that's 25 years in the making, but.
Yeah, let's do one more question. We have time. Yes, sir.
I have a comment. I won't be able to be here during Dixon's presentation, so I want to say this now. I was the first chair of the KBBC, and we didn't push a rope, we pushed a wet noodle. Also, when I left KBBC, we tried to start a state coalition. Paul mentioned the word coalition as a kind of key phrase. I ended up being the one guy left. We had all volunteers. We knew we had to get a paid person. We didn't know how to get there because a bunch of volunteers couldn't do it. And they were, at that point, they were wanting to ride a bike and advocate. I think where we come from mid-1990s to 2018 is awesome. Like this event is awesome. I thank Bill for even sending an email about free foot, commenting on the 3 foot guideline. I wouldn't even know we were having this thing, but we need an statewide advocacy, educational group, whatever word you want to use. We need one desperately. Bill needs one to continue doing his work. He needs someone that can say things he can't say. I got off the board so I could say stuff we couldn't say. We did get something accomplished, by the way. We got the state to put language in their state policy about ensuring that bike ped would be looked at every time a highway was removed. They didn't want to do that from the beginning. So we did get one thing done as a Kentucky Bicycle Club. That's what a t-shirt. It's very important. I want to urge people who are much younger than me to begin and more injured really dive into.
That's a great note to end on. Let's thank our speakers.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Kentucky Cycling Connection series. The Kentucky Cycling YouTube channel is a volunteer effort aimed at promoting cycling in the Bluegrass region. You can support this work by sharing the videos on social media. Also, please like the video on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. Thanks.